Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Flynn. I'm a senior at Texas Tech University, and I'll be graduating this December. For my senior thesis project, I chose to do sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church. As an introduction, when attempting to find solutions to a complex problem, defining the problem or stating the research question is the first and most basic activity that one undertakes in conducting research or engaging in problem solving of any kind. This research question then is to consider solutions for sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church, within the United States specifically. This is clearly a complex problem because no single discipline has been able to explain the problem comprehensively or resolve it satisfactorily. This problem is an unresolved societal need or issue. This has been reinforced by the recent media coverage on newly discovered sexual abuse by priests in the Roman Catholic Church. It is an ongoing issue in religious organizations all over the United States, not just the Roman Catholic Church. Sadly, research shows that child sex abuse happens across Protestant and evangelical churches, and at times at a higher rate than the Catholic Church, although those numbers are mixed. Yet media coverage makes it seem like it only occurs in the Roman Catholic Church. The Associated Press did an interesting investigation and found that the three companies that insure a majority of Protestant and evangelical churches say they typically receive upward of 260 reports a year of children younger than 18 being sexually abused by members of the clergy, church staff, volunteers, or congregates. Further research has found that the three faith-based insurance companies that were interviewed by the Associated Press provide coverage for 165,500 churches, mostly Protestant Christian churches, and 5,500 other religious-oriented organizations. They ended up reporting about 7,095 claims of alleged sexual abuse by clergy, church staff, congregation members, or volunteers between the years 1987 and 2000. 7,000 claims. That's too many. That's too many. Now, the biggest problem is the Protestant numbers are harder to come by and sketchier because the denominations are less centralized than the Catholic Church. Many congregations are independent, making reporting even more difficult. Furthermore, little systematic research has been done on the problem of child sex abuse in churches other than the Roman Catholic Church, and finding out the extent of the problem is difficult. In 2004, the Catholic Church granted unprecedented access to official Catholic Church records to John Jay College, bringing about greater transparency for research. Since the Roman Catholic Church is in the spotlight and potentially has more research on the subject, this paper will focus on sexual abuse primarily in this religious organization. Since this is a major problem, there are many disciplines potentially relevant to this problem. History, law and religion, political science, behavior and ethics, organizational management, and psychology all have insights concerning the problem. In order to integrate these different subjects, it is obvious that this needs to be resolved with an interdisciplinary approach. So now, the literature review. When assessing potentially relevant discipline, it's important to ensure that disciplines best suited for the complex problem include at least one phenomenon involved in the problem or research question. As stated before, the potentially relevant fields for this paper include history, law and religion, political science, behavior and ethics, organizational management, and psychology. When looking at different disciplines, sometimes there is an overlapping of different disciplinary perspectives. It is important to remember to reduce the number of potentially relevant disciplines to those that are most relevant. The overlapping perspectives often occur among subdisciplines. Therefore, the subjects best suited for this particular paper are history and law and religion. The other disciplines are good and do have phenomenon related to the research question, but history and law and religion have more research in the problem of sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church. History is always important when learning from our past and our present mistakes. Law and religion is an integrated field that looks at the relationship and interaction of religious laws and secular laws. So history is defined as a chronological record of significant events, such as those affecting a nation or an institution, often including an explanation of their causes. To understand this a little better, it is important to know how historians would describe the subject of history. Well, according to the Texas Tech History Department, history is more than memorizing names, dates, and facts. It's not just about what happens in the past. It's about why things happen in the past. It's about how we got to the present. And it's about where we're going to in the future. In this context, history can review sexual abuse in the church's past, why it's occurring in the past, and why it's occurring now. Why it was occurring in the past and why it is occurring now, and what direction the church is heading in the future. Well, the first article is titled, "The History and Consequences of Sexual Abuse Crisis in the Catholic Church." This article discusses the consequences and history of the sexual abuse crisis in the Roman Catholic Church. It primarily focuses on the crisis in the U.S. that occurred in the 20th century. It talks about the first time sexual abuse in the church was made public in the U.S. and the decisions made by the church in handling those situations. The article shares a personal story of a victim of sexual abuse by a priest. It discusses the former practices and situations that would occur when accusations of sexual abuse were made. Well, option one was generally less severe. A priest would basically get a slap on the wrist and maybe do some counseling. Then they would be moved to another church without sharing the history of the priest with the new parish. This was by far the worst option for the public. Oftentimes, this option was not chosen based on evil intentions. Usually it was due to overtrust that the priest really was sorry and wouldn't do it again. The second option varied across the spectrum. The allegation was always taken seriously. Counseling and treatment was often required. Sometimes the priest would return to a different parish, working with children again. Other times he was sent to work in a hospital or maybe a nursing home where no children were present. Sometimes the priest would quit, or the priest would lose his privileges as a priest and be removed from the order. However, he would not be excommunicated. The families of the victims usually settled out of court quietly. This is where the article points out that the quiet settlement was often at the request of the victim's family, not at the church. Law enforcement was almost never involved, and the article concludes that the church has tough decisions to make regarding sexual abuse. It states that it hopes the church chooses to do the right thing when dealing with future abuse. This brings about the concept of an ecclesiastical or church state when solving problems in the church. The church state involves the Catholic hierarchy, from the Pope down to the individual bishops. It claims that it has the sole right to deal with matters within its sphere of influence, particularly the management or dismissal of priests from the clergy state, as well as the administration of church financial affairs to assure monetary claims for their victims. In other words, the church believes that it has the sole right to pay, the victims for their, for what happened, for the abuse, and they have the sole right to decide what happens to their priests. They don't believe that it needs to be taken care of in the courts, or at least they didn't used to. For centuries, the Catholic Church has handled its business internally. This idea is practiced by the Church today, with few exceptions depending on the country. Many leaders of the Church still believe that handling matters in this way is best for dealing with child sexual abuse. As seen in the previous paragraph, this method unfortunately has been used to cover up child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. The next article is titled "The Roman Catholic Church, a Centuries-Old History of Awareness of Clerical Child Sex Abuse." This article in particular covers the history of sexual abuse issues in the Catholic Church. It discusses how the modern world and media discusses the church and its issues. In addition, it reviews how many people believe sexual abuse is a modern problem. The truth is, this has been an ongoing issue for the church throughout history. It also clarifies how the Catholic Church condemns sexual abuse and how it has tried for centuries to put a stop to sexual abuse. The article points out that the Church passed many laws in the Middle Ages trying to put a stop to sexual abuse. The problem is many of those laws were not properly distributed amongst the Church. It was not until the 1130s that the Church became more centralized. The Church then attempted to set up the framework for proper administrative implementation of canon law. Now, the Church hierarchy is responsible for passing canon laws for all Catholics to follow. This concept was created to bring order and law to Christians and the countries they resided in. Canon is defined as an ecclesiastical person, a member of a chapter or body of clerics living according to rule and presided over by one of their number. So these canons come together to pass laws for the Catholic Church and its members. It is still used today to maintain Catholic teaching and gives direction on how to handle problems like the church sex abuse problem. It is far from perfect and has been continually updated. The third article, titled Recalibrating U.S. Catholic Church-State Relations, the Effects of Clerical Sexual Abuse. This article goes into details about the effects of sexual abuse it goes into the details of the effects of sexual assault and abuse on the relationship between the U.S. state and the Catholic Church as of 2016. It goes into details about the history of the Church's dealing with sexual abuse, like many of the other articles, how the canon laws of the Church came to pass, and how the Church historically handled crimes by its clergy. It also looks at how civil laws and state power has taken control away from the Church in regards to criminal and payment of said crimes. One interesting thing that stood out in regards to how the Church handled crimes of sexual abuse was the discipline used in the past was often harsher than modern punishment. Historically, the Church passed laws that strictly forbade sexual activity by priests and clergy. Punishment for child and sexual teen abuse was often physical punishment. Punishments included whipping, beatings, and shaving one's head as a mark of shame. Imprisonment in monasteries, being chained and left in the street for a set period of time. These punishments were issued by the local bishop and not the civil authorities. The problem mentioned in the article is that so many canon laws were passed on the subject that most people didn't know them all. Even if they did know them, many were unsure how to implement them. There are modern changes to canon law. The Church is now trying to implement new policy on sexual abuse. However, since the Church can no longer use many of its medieval punishments, they are left with defrocking, lactizing, and excommunication. These concepts are how the Church punishes its members and clergy for breaking the rules or committing crimes. Defrocking is defined as to dismiss a priest, remove him from his job, usually because of bad behavior. Lactized is a word unique to Christianity and defined as a process which takes from a priest or other cleric the illicit use of his powers, rights, and authority. These clerics are forbidden to wear clerical dress, or to perform ceremonies, or to administer the sacraments ordinary to their former offices. Similar to defrocking, but a little bit more severe. The last concept is excommunication. This is a word unique to Christianity as well, and considered to be the severest penalty a Christian can receive. In simple terms, it is given for grave sins like rape, murder, abortion, heresy, being an apostate of the Church. Those are generally the big ones. Some are automatic excommunications, others require a public order of sorts. Automatic means an official order does not have to be given by a bishop or a pope. Excommunication is rather complex in the Catholic Church. It varies from not being able to participate in the sacraments to not being able to be in the church during service. Excommunication mainly affects the spirit and soul. There are no pictures of excommunicated in Catholic churches, so unless it's made public in the media, people usually don't know. There are many major and minor reasons one can be excommunicated. The goal of excommunication is not to punish, but to repent. The Church wants people to repent and seek redemption. Now, depending on the offense, redemption can be achieved through confession with a priest, something as simple as that. However, major offenses need the approval of a bishop or even the Pope. This research aids in determining how one can find solutions to the sexual abuse problem in the Catholic Church. By looking at this data, the Catholic Church, U.S. government, and researchers can look into better ways of reducing or stopping sexual abuse. Now, for the sake of time, we'll skim over a little bit of the law and religion aspect of this presentation. So law and religion is an interdisciplinary subject committed to studying law in its social context, in particular in its intersection with disciplines of religion and ethics. According to the Journal of Law and Religion, this field focuses on cutting-edge research on religion, human rights, and religious freedom, religious-state relations, religious sources and dimensions of public, private, penal, and procedural law, religious legal systems and their place in secular law, theological jurisprudence, political theology, legal and religious ethics, and more. This particular field has a wealth of information on sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church. Different scholarly articles have been written in law and religion to find solutions to the problem of sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, there are a number of articles that touch on different topics of this field. These 3 articles that I'm going to kind of skim over are moving in the positive direction. They take very good steps to find solutions to the problem. In this first article, it's called Holding Bishops Accountable, How Lawsuits Helped the Roman Catholic Church Confront Clergy of Sexual Abuse. In essence, what the article found is that torts law and the legal system was really successful in changing church policy, at least in the United States. Now, what torts law is, let's see, let me give you. So a tort is defined as an act or omission that gives rise to injury or harm to another and amounts to civil wrong for which court imposes liability. In the context of torts, injury describes the invasion of any legal right, whereas harm describes loss or determinant in fact that an individual suffers. So the biggest highlights is it really points out 3, like this affects, torts law is really done in civil court primarily. And what it was doing is, it was basically bringing this abuse public and, hurting the church in its pocketbook. I mean, the church, obviously, if it was true and justified, they did want to pay for it, but these lawsuits really got the Catholic Church to change a lot of its policies for the better. Torts law has not been as successful in other areas with other companies. Really, it's found most of its success with the Catholic Church. The next article is titled Command and Coercion, Clerical Immunity Scandal and the Sex Abuse Crisis in the Roman Catholic Church. This article really talks about clerical scandal, immunity, and the sexual assault crisis of the Catholic Church, of course. It talks about a bunch of scandals that the church had to deal with in the 90s. And it covers a large amount of information in regards to immunity from civil law and issues regarding immunity from civil law that the church may have done in the past. One of the things that the article makes clear is that a culture of secrecy has resulted due to the church's autonomy when dealing with sexual abuse. The concept of civil authority is suggested as a possible solution to the problem of child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. Throughout history, and even today, some church clergy try to claim exemption from the secular law and be subject after trial in the church's own courts to the milder punishment applicable under canon law. So the concept of civil authority taking priority over church authority is clearly favored in this discipline. So moving down onto some of the interdisciplinary research. What's important to note here is that Pope Francis said that reliable data indicates that about 2% of clergy in the Catholic Church are pedophiles. This sadly means that about 8,000 predator priests are in active ministry around the world. It is clear, however, that the Pope and the Church do not condone this behavior, despite what some may believe. Pope Francis himself has apologized for the despicable actions of these clerics, describing the priests as members of a sacrilegious cult and calling their behavior a crime and a grave sin. Despite this apology, sexual abuse still occurs, and many people ask, why isn't the Church doing anything about it? The Catholic Church has been trying to put a stop for it for centuries. Now, this is where the conflict between disciplines arrives. As stated previously, historically, the Catholic Church has been in charge of laws and punishment pertaining to its priests and clergy. The Church has had a historically backed precedent for handling things on its own. The Catholic Church claims that it has the sole right to deal with matters within its sphere of influence, particularly the management and/or dismissal of priests from the clerical state. So who is responsible for handling clerical sexual abusers? Is it the civil authorities or is it the officials in the Catholic Church? Well, a lot of historians have, cited the precedent that the Church has used in handling the situations on its own. However, those in the field of law and religion believe that civil authorities should be solely responsible. They believe that civil authorities have a compelling state interest to protect children, a concern so critical that it overrides church authority in certain internal investigation in monetary matters. Many Americans don't understand why the civil authorities can't be responsible, and historians like to point out that, now and in the past, the church has operated in areas where law and order is not what it is here in the United States. Now, the United States bishops have found some common ground between these two disciplines, but we'll get to that in a minute. Part of the other issue why they want to include civil authorities is this culture of secrecy that has formed in the Catholic Church, at least in the past. This is how we hear about some of these scandals. This is how some of these scandals occurred, like they were trying to hide it, or they moved priests around for whatever reason, whether it was evil intentions or it was just, the research says it's mixed. As we found in the media, some people have found that it is of evil intentions. Other people have found that it's simply because they thought they were doing the right thing, However, this culture of secrecy leads the discipline of law and religion to conflict with the historical viewpoint of this issue. The concept of torts law is believed to prove that the legal system is successful in holding the Roman Catholic Church accountable in the U.S. As stated previously, tort is defined as an act or omission that gives rise to injury or harm to another and amounts to a civil wrong for which courts impose liability. In order to combat some of these issues, the Catholic Church, specifically in the United States, has decided to, it's called the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops have come together and tried to find common ground, honestly, between these two disciplines. They already started to do that between these two viewpoints. But with these disciplines, it's clearly possible to create common ground between the concepts and theories. These two disciplines really only have a few conflicts between them. Both rely on historical evidence to support their research. However, there are some problems. The articles from the discipline of history really have little to no current solutions other than let the church handle punishment of its clergy. Most of the historical solutions to the problem of sexual abuse that at least were effective in the past are no longer considered legal. Some people believe the government should abolish limitations on criminal charges, likening sexual abuse to murder. I'm one of those people. This leads to the problem with law and religion. They have too many solutions. Most of them involve just passing tons of laws restricting the freedom and sovereignty of the Holy See, which is the Pope and the leader of the Catholic Church. This is where the disciplines clash. So many who study history of the Catholic Church understand why it's important that the Vatican and Pope have freedom and sovereignty. This is even true in the United States case of the United States. Historically, people and nations are not fair and usually have self-interests in mind. This has been true, in the United States. In the case of the U.S., we have this kind of new American First policy. In the past, not so distant past, Catholics, at least in the history of the United States, were kind of seen, as outcasts in a Protestant America of sorts. And it wasn't really till John F. Kennedy, who was our first Catholic president, where they really got over the hump of, I wouldn't quite call it oppression, but we'll use the word oppression against, religious oppression against the Catholics. But in order to solve some of these issues between the two disciplines, the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops created a code of conduct for all priests and clergy Now, this gives rules and regulations on how a priest is supposed to behave. It included rules on conduct, and if the rules are followed, no priest, child, or clergy should be in a position for sexual abuse to occur. They even include what to do if sexual abuse does occur. In the 2002 Code of Conduct, which has been updated obviously over the last couple of years, but this is the most recent one that has been researched. It clearly states that if any sexual activity occurs, it should be reported to religious authorities or to civil authorities if it involves a minor. As long as this information was not revealed during the seal of confession, then local authorities should be informed. So why are we hearing about 300 priests involved in sexual abuse in 2018? Well, the diocese pointed out that these are historic allegations, with the most recent one dating back to the early 1990s. Still not a good excuse, but it's been, covered up, and the most recent one was back in the 1990s after this Code of Conduct was put in place. So current abuse cases are actually being handled according to the Code of Conduct. In February 2018, an allegation occurred in the Diocese of Dallas. Upon learning of the allegations in February, the diocese officials immediately filed a report with law enforcement agencies to launch a criminal investigation. The diocese said that the allegations were found to be credible, and they followed through and let the authorities, try and take their course. This is an example of proper enforcement of the Code of Conduct, yet secrecy and cover-up still occurs. So in an effort to combat this level of secrecy, priests can no longer consult with their bishop over personal and professional problems. Disclosure of certain information may lead to their permanent removal from the ministry. This is supposed to prevent cover-ups from happening, because that's what happened with a lot of the cover-ups we hear about in the media. Is a bishop would move someone around, or there was kind of secrecy between bishops and priests. So in an effort to combat that, it's kind of like a professional workplace. It's almost like if you share something with your boss, he's probably going to have to share it with the proper authorities. So the problem with this is priests who experience personal problems or who may have violated their code of pastoral conduct are told to immediately limit their exposure to the risks of liability, discipline, or lactization. Consultation with civil and canonical attorneys might be more prudent before any conversations, admissions, or disclosures to a bishop or diocesan staff is shared. Problem again is that a priest sees their bishop as a spiritual leader, someone who they can seek for counsel. And the Code of Conduct shows that U.S. priests are now told to rely more on civil authorities for aid. Really, only time will tell if this will stop these things from occurring. So, in conclusion, let's discuss maybe some of the possible solutions that integration of these two fields may be able to come up with. So, even though it's difficult and it's time-consuming, finding common ground and integrating research from multiple disciplines, it really is often the best way to truly solve a difficult problem. The research articles used in this paper provided incredible insight into the research question, and it really allows one to create quality common ground. However, this paper and presentation is not meant to solve this problem, but hopefully it moves people in the right direction. So what are some of the ways the problem of sexual abuse can be reduced? Well, first, the country must continue using the torts law. In the case of the Catholic Church, it is very effective for exposing cover-ups and secrecy in parts of the Catholic Church. The Pope needs to continue his stance against sexual abuse. He needs to make it clear that cover-ups and abuse, if proven true, at least in the U.S. legal system, will result in removal from positions of power within the Church, as well as a possible excommunication. The Pope needs to continue supporting the code of ethics set down by the U.S. bishops. However, U.S. bishops should no longer be exempt from certain rules in the code of ethics. Forgot to mention that in that code of ethics, there are certain rules that they're exempt from. It's not quite not having to report illegalities, but it's other rules that they probably should follow as well. Nothing illegal, nothing quite related to some of the issues, but they definitely need to be following all the same rules. And you know what? In the newer version, they may be. But as far as 2002 is concerned, they're exempt from certain rules. Type of now here's another good one. So a type of inquisition needs to take place in the U.S. in order to root out any more cover-ups or corruption occurring in the U.S. diocese. Since the Catholic Church really does feel that it's its duty to deal with the problems internally, an inquisition of this nature would be an excellent show of faith that the Church is no longer hiding sexual abuse. I believe that the U.S. bishops should show support for harsher punishments towards sexual abuse. In addition, they should also show public and financial support by lobbying for a removal of the statute of limitation on sexual abuse. On the local and community levels, Catholic churches should make announcements before or after services reminding parents not to leave children unattended, and instructions on what to do if abuse is suspected. On the level of family, parents should educate the difference between good touch and bad touch. Parents need to tell their children that if something bad happens between a child and an adult, it is not the child's fault, and they will not get in trouble for it. Hopefully, if all these things are put into action, sexual abuse in the Catholic Church can be greatly reduced. Thank you.